Good morning, everyone, and thanks again for joining us at the 2021 Sloan Sports Analytics Conference. My name is Veer Gangwal, and I'm a first-year MBA student at MIT Sloan. It's my pleasure to introduce our panel, Acceleration of Sports Data Innovation at ESPN. Our panelists today are Jeff Bennett, Vice President of the Stats and Information Group at ESPN, Davion Ross, Co-founder, President, and COO of DD Sports Inc., and Mark Walker, Senior Vice President of Content, Business Development, and Innovation at ESPN. Our panel will be moderated by Kevin Lopes, Senior Director of Content, Business Development, and Innovation at ESPN. The panel will run for 35 minutes, and we'll leave 10 minutes at the end for questions. If you'd like to ask a question, you can use the Q&A option on the right side of the screen on the All in the Loop platform, or you can ask it on Twitter using the hashtag Analytics2.0. Questions will then be selected by the moderator. With that, I'll turn it over to Kevin.
Thanks, Veer. Appreciate it. So just want to cheerlead what Veer had just mentioned and highly encourage and ask folks in the audience to submit questions. The panel here is highly interested in answering your questions. And even if you think of an idea or a question midway through, feel free to submit that at any point. And Veer, feel free to also send those to me as we go, so we build a good bank of questions for the end. Just some ground rules for the panel. Crosstalk is highly encouraged. So Davion, if I ask you a question, and Jeff, you'd love to jump in on it, feel free to do so. If we get too bogged down, I will pull us out and I'll push us along the next question. We're really aiming for this to be a good conversation and certainly not me robotically asking questions. So I think a good place to start would be a 60-second introduction of each of you by yourselves, and then followed by a nice icebreaker. And we are a sports company. This is a sports analytics panel. I think a sports icebreaker is necessary. So I think in your 60-second intro, it'd be great for you to share your worst sports memory. So I will go first. My worst sports memory is I attended the University of Rhode Island, and youre basketball is my all-time favorite program. In 1998, Mark Madsen of Stanford stole the inbounds pass from Bettino Mobley and dunked it over Tyson Wheeler to defeat my Rhode Island Rams and prevent us from going to the Final Four. It still is by far, in a way, my worst sports memory. The David Tyree helmet catch is a close second, but that has grounded my sports fandom ever since. Quick background on me, I've been with ESPN for 13 years. I spent the first 10 years of my career in the programming and acquisitions department, doing scheduling for college and also acquiring a lot of collegiate acquisitions. I spent the last 3 working in content, business development, and innovation, leading or helping to lead our BD group, innovation group, to develop events for the future. I currently report to Mark Walker. So Mark is my boss. And in full disclosure, I promised Mark 1 softball question. So Mark, this is your 1 softball, 60-second intro and your worst sports memory.
Yeah, so I'm Mark Walker. I've been at the Walt Disney Company for a total of 10 years, actually, as of March 29th. I've been in ESPN just coming up on 2 years. Ran the collection of digital experiences at Disney, which ultimately recast as the Disney Digital Network. Ran franchise for parks and resorts, and been leading innovation and business development at ESPN, like I said, for the last couple of years. My best sports memory as a Cardinal is Kevin's worst, but my worst sports memory, and I'm going to date myself tremendously through this, is I grew up in the Washington, D.C. area. I can't tell people I'm from DC because people are actually from the district get really upset about that. I grew up in Maryland. I was a rabid Senators fan. Frank Howard was my idol. He was this man mountain kind of archetypal slugger who made a baseball bat look like a toothpick. And somewhere in a very sensitive, formative part of my youth, the Senators left Washington. And, I'll be quite honest with you, I've never recovered from that. I will never see baseball the same way. Despite some of the recent success of the Nats, they will just never be my team. Because that was the Frank Howard led Senators, that was my team. So there you are.
Jeff, you want to go next?
Sure. Jeff Bennett. I'm actually in my 27th year at ESPN. which sounds amazing to say out loud because it goes so fast. Most of my career before moving to management was as a researcher for studio shows such as SportsCenter and Baseball Tonight. Baseball was my favorite sport growing up and probably the one I was most knowledgeable and passionate about. That was kind of my dream job when I got to ESPN, was to be the Baseball Tonight researcher. I was able to do that for 4 full seasons and a few seasons before that as the backup researcher. Awesome position. I'm going to intersect my worst sports memory because it came while I was a Baseball Tonight researcher. I'm a Red Sox fan, and October 16th of 2003 was the date of Game 7 against the Yankees in the ALCS, with the Aaron Boone home run and the great Pedro Martinez giving up the lead, staying in 1 inning too long. I was, because of Baseball Tonight, supposed to go and work at Fenway, so I thought, the next morning, because the game was a Thursday night and the World Series started on Saturday. We were going to do our show from Fenway on Friday. So I thought I was going to get a Cubs Red Sox World Series. I got a Marlins Yankees World Series. After the home run, I basically didn't, I questioned my place on earth, why I got into sports, my religion. It was all on the table for me. I didn't talk to anyone for 2 days except for, professional I was working, but other than that, there was no small talk for 2 days. Following year, Red Sox almost got swept against the Yankees. Of course, they don't. They make history. Thank goodness, because if they did, I'm not sure I would have been able to continue my job in sports. That's how much it meant to me at that point. So I've grown up since then a lot, but that was a huge part. Moved into management. I've had the honor of running the Stats Information Group since November of 2017. I've been part of the senior leadership team since that group was formed in 2007. And that's about 200 people, 130 are full-timers, about 60 or so, 60, 70 are part-timers that are more seasonal for the college sports time. And we have, 3 big main areas. We have a world's world-renowned data newsroom. So taking all the feeds, all the sports, we cover all sports at ESPN across the world, and we push that out for all of our automation, international editions of digital and whatnot. So all that sports data comes through our newsroom. We have a research staff, like I talked about, what I used to do, servicing studio shows and event games, and of course all other platforms that have grown since then. We have our bottom line staff, which are our news, information, and stats group, the ticker on the bottom of 16 networks across the world. And then I was honored enough to start the sports analytics team in 2011. We've created metrics out of the gate like total QBR and basketball power index for college basketball. And since then, we've grown to 60, 70 or so metrics and tools that we've created. Many are forward facing, some are still internal facing that help our broadcasts. Brian Burke is on our team. He spoke yesterday on the NFL panel. And over the years, we've had people such as Dean Oliver, Ben Alamar, Brian McDonald, Alec Patani, and many more. And certainly the current team we have are all special as well. So very honored to have led that team for a while as well.
Great. Thanks, Jeff. Davion, 60 seconds, worst sports memory.
All right. So my name is Davion Ross, one of the founders, presidents of DD Sports Shot Trackers. Some of you may not know the DD Sports, but that's actually our umbrella name. Shot Trackers, the basketball product, as we position ourselves to go elsewhere. It's a sensor-based technology. My worst, I don't know if it's my worst, but I've had several bad sports memory as a collegiate player. Some of them ended up having me shooting in the gym till 2 o'clock in the morning because I missed free throws or something to lose the game. But one of the memories that come to mind is that, again, personally, we were playing against our rival. And, I was the leading scorer on my team. He was the leading scorer. And we were just going at it in the first half. And I remember stealing the ball from him and going down the right side and just taking off, thinking in my mind, I'm going to do like this exceptional dunk. And as I go up, I change my mind mid-air and decide to put it on the backboard. And he comes out from nowhere and just slaps it on the backboard. And, I went into the locker room just like having all of these flashbacks. Granted, we were able to recover and win the game and make the game a competitive one. But, just in a split second, I went from putting somebody in a poster to being the one with your basketball slapped on the backboard. So that still gives me, a lot of rough nights. But personally, that was one of the worst sports memories that I have.
Thanks, Davion. So you paint a good picture there. I feel like I just watched the video of that happening. So first question here, I think important to have one pandemic question, right? We're on a Zoom based on the pandemic here now. I in my business development role, I've done a lot of deals on Zoom in the last year. I think there's probably folks in the audience here I might have negotiated to acquire rights or services for on behalf of ESPN. And we've been rather successful in pivoting and doing that in Zoom in the last year. Certainly in ESPN, we have a lot more remote productions, far greater than we would have had without the pandemic. They forced an innovation for us to embrace. And I think we're not going to truly go back to where we were before. So the question for the panel here is, can you share how the pandemic has affected your core roles in the last year, right? So Jeff, like how has the sports data landscape changed? How are you presenting sports? I'm assuming you've got a lot of your staff still working remotely from home. Mark, is there any learnings here from how we've conducted business over Zoom? Have we been successful and why? And then Davion, I can only imagine, in Shot Tracker having installs set up at schools and campuses get locked down. Are you still able to get those installs, and how have you weathered the storm here? So it's a jump ball. I guess I'll throw to Jeff first here, just to take that question.
Thanks. So yeah, it had a huge impact on our staff immediately. Our studio shows certainly scaled back in March of 2020, but SportsCenter stayed on the air. We had SportsCenters at night. There's a ton of obviously breaking news. The bottom line stayed on the air. So while many of the sports world slowed down, so our stats and analysis, kind of data operation, had a chance to kind of regroup and figure out with a little bit of lead time when sports come back, how could they work from home and take in these feeds and monitor games from home setups rather than a newsroom that looks like a sports casino with all sorts of TVs everywhere. We had a little bit of lead time on that, but for the research team and the bottom line team, it was immediate. Like, okay, we have basically like 2 days to figure this out. How do we service Latin America bottom lines from someone's house in central Connecticut? How do we interface with those master control rooms, and how do we get the software to work? So there's a lot of really interesting collaboration. It was an amazing time. It was an amazing weekend for sure. And then the next week to make sure it all worked as smoothly as it did. And how to research a show. A researcher is like tethered to the anchors. And that obviously wasn't going to happen. So how could that work? We are always in the studio just off camera to help them during a show. And of course, all the preparation going into the show. And to do that from someone's house was almost mind-boggling. Now, we didn't have a lot of live games ending, which certainly adds a level of complexity to be a show researcher, but there was so much breaking news. And there was like Tom Brady went within the first couple of days, became a free agent and went to Tampa. So that was an enormous story for us. We had the NFL draft in April. We had the WNBA draft also. So there was a lot of things that we had to do that we never conceived of doing from a home setup. So, obviously video technology. We had some internal technology that we used. We had some apps that allowed us to communicate with producers and talent into their ear. So really amazing work there. From a data perspective, from the business, it was like, hey, we have a lot of data contracts. Let's figure out what this new world means for us from a payment perspective and just from a collaboration perspective. I have to reconstruct some contracts. Some of the conversations were very difficult, which you would like to have done in person, but I'm doing Blue Jeans or Zoom or anything else that we were migrating to that time. So that was a little, it was hard. It was hard to have those kind of relationships as well. But I think we all made the best of it and understood the situation, of course, that we were in. And then from a data perspective, it did give us a time to kind of regroup on what it would look like coming back and how we would think about servicing when sports kind of restarted in July with a bang, like how that would work with the bubble situation, getting data to digital and all that. So there was a lot of speed bumps there that, everyone just kind of came together. And looking back, I couldn't be more proud of how it worked just not within our own group, but within ESPN and the vendors that we work with as well in the leagues.
Thanks, Jeff. Davion, you want to take it?
Yeah, absolutely. So, as a startup, we have a entirely different perspective, right? When this occurred, we was going into the college tournaments, conference tournaments, and we had approximately 40, 50 installs that was scheduled between March and August. And, everything shut down, so no install. So as a small company, we're not sure exactly how long this is last. So it cost us to, we had to go through some, layoffs and really right size our team just because we weren't sure how long this was going to be. So as you can imagine, as a startup, that was pretty painful because we didn't necessarily have the resources of a large organization to, be able to see this through. We're fortunate we're coming out of it. The other thing that I think that was really exciting for us is, again, being a startup, you're somewhat innovative. You're on the front of the curve in regards to technology. And I think it actually helped to a certain degree because things that people had in their roadmap 2 to 3 years ago were being accelerated just because they didn't have a choice. So from our perspective, we started looking at, hey, how do we use our data to empower some of the things that Jeff and Kevin, you both talked about in regards to remote production? How can we use our data, not just to provide our data, but to provide our data to, enhance fan experiences at home, to add personalization at home, to be able to use our data to control cameras in a remote manner because, of the COVID environments. What we tried to do is to try to find multiple additional ways that we can actually capitalize on the data that we're providing, namely the XYZ data that's delivered in sub 100 milliseconds, and then any type of event classification or analytical data that we could provide. So we try to find ways to do so, and we found a lot of opportunities. We've had Big 12 games here where we actually have our data controlling the cameras without somebody being in front of the cameras, or adding additional cameras so that we can test out things like ISO cams and streamline virtual cameras, etc. So we really try to figure out additional ways that we can use our data to help our partners and different people in the community in regards to how they can actually handle the pandemic and some of the rules that are now delivered to us based on how we produce, how we drive efficiency, and how we bring these products to the market. So
thanks, Mark.
Yeah,
go ahead, Mark.
Yeah, look, I was going to say, for us, our work is so grounded in internal and external partnerships, right? That's really the essence of what this innovation and business development team does. So at first, look, it was a little challenging, but once we really fell into the rhythm of understanding, how to use video conferencing, how to reconfigure, restructure meetings, it's been a tremendous accelerant, right? What it's allowed us to do is, have a, frequency of contact with our partners and sort of, an ease of bringing people together that we just didn't have before, and I think it's, we've also moved up so many things because, in the past to kind of, to really manifest intent with some of our partners, like you got to show up in their offices or they have to show up in yours, and now, meeting them might get pushed out 2 weeks, it now occurs, the next day. However, when I recounted that acceleration to someone, they asked me a very interesting question. And they said, how many new partnerships have you developed, in this video conferencing environment? How much of that is the relationships you have with existing partners that you're carrying forward? And how much of that, sourcing and creating new relationships? And so, admittedly, on balance, this has worked really, really well to extend existing partnerships and relationships like the one we have Davion and Shot Tracker, but it's been somewhat challenging in terms of sourcing, creating and, solidifying new relationships. So, been a little bit of a mixed bag. I think the really interesting thing is when we get back to normal, what is the right mix going to be? Kevin itching to get on a plane and doing video conferencing, right? Like what's the right mix for us and for this organization in order to continue to drive innovation through partnerships?
I think that's exactly the way. I'm sorry, I can just jump in because I find that same way for us, Mark. It was like, batten down the hatches. What's the most important thing? Let's go through all of our catalog of our existing relationships and let's get them right. And the check-ins have been more frequent than ever. But the things on the periphery, the things that we don't know, like that's the harder thing. Like, so, I'm missing walking the halls of this conference like I have in the past years and looking at the vendors and making relationships. And, I'm sure we can still follow up and, they've made things possible here to go visit the sponsor tables virtually. But there is something about just running into people at conferences and things of that nature where you can build on some new relationships and people can get some time with you that is maybe not as scripted. So I think we have to get that balance, as you said, back here hopefully soon, because I do think that's one that is missing.
Jeff, I want to drill down a little bit more with you. I know you touched on this already. But could you take us under the hood a bit on how maybe in the last 5 years, how your group has changed or evolved based on technology? Like 5 years ago, how did an idea a stat idea generated from your group make its way on air versus how is that happening today, right? So I know you touched on how we're doing it remotely, but 5 years ago, were we getting tracking data from the MLB and the NBA and the NFL, and how are we utilizing that technology on air? And is there any other technology that your teams are using day to day that's different than what it was in the past?
All right, well, there's a lot of questions in there, so I'll do my best to not, spend the next 25 minutes dominating the conversation. So just in general, yeah, look, certainly the last 5 years, I think tracking data, and it goes back a bit further than that. SportView, we were working with SportView and stats 2013, 2014. We did NFL trials in 2014. I went to some games, and some others of my team went to games also in NFL Next Gen. Same thing for MLB StatCast. So obviously we're league broadcast partners. So we have an inside track in what they're developing. We're doing it right now with the NHL and player and puck tracking. Obviously, we have a new NHL contract starting this fall that we're super excited about. And player tracking is a major component of how they want to advance the league. So we're digging in on that right now. Traditionally, our team hasn't done a lot of hockey tracking because there wasn't really a big distribution point for ESPN. Now that we have the games on linear and in digital for streaming, we're really excited about an increased digital presence and really how to make those broadcasts innovative and how to bring these stats to fans, both through the NHL's distributions and through ESPN's distribution. So those kind of challenges are great for us. As far as like how a stat gets made, it's like anything else. Like what's the question you're trying to answer? What's the insight we're trying to add to the field? How does this improve ESPN? How does it improve our storytelling? How will fans interact with it? Then it comes to what do we call it? From a branding perspective, how do we communicate that internally so people know it just kind of just drops from the sky? It's not going to get used at ESPN. So we have to get buy-in and from show producers and writers, and then externally, how do we communicate that to fans? So there's a lot that goes into that. And then down the road, it's like how does that get automated on ESPN digital products, which is a whole different roadmap and technical hurdles. But really, just we have some amazing advantages in our team because we have, world-class data scientists who are sports fans first, which I think is undervalued in the industry here. These people are sports fans first who follow many sports, not just one sport. So we hit all sports ESPN. So we're like a bunch of Swiss, I say we, but my team is a bunch of Swiss Army knives. And we have access to analysts and coaches and former players, people who really know the game. When Brian Burke's sitting down and working on taking NFL Next Gen stat raw XYZ data and working around training a model to determine in real time what type of NFL defense a team is playing. There's a cover to, it's like 10 different 12 classifications. He's working with all pro players like Dominic Foxworth and others, people who've been Super Bowl champions, or same thing we do with the line blocking and pass rushing with Teddy Bruschi. And we get their input and they help us. And it's an amazing advantage that we have that, we're integrated not just in with production, but the talent, but also the entire ecosystem of ESPN. And really we try to lean into those people's knowledge base to help us fine tune our ideas to make it the best case of itself when it starts to hit the fans. And then we keep improving on it beyond that when we get better data. So it's a huge iterative process.
So Davion, I want to pivot to you here. So I think you've got some good expertise in player tracking data here. I saw recently that the Big 12 approved using tech on the bench in the Big 12 tournament. We did a little integration with our coverage based on that stat. Can you explain to the audience a little bit, how is the Big 12 using that data on the sideline? And then how else do you view the bigger picture of that data that's being generated live in game being utilized?
Absolutely. So it was really a privilege and a pleasure for us to be able to do that. A couple of years ago, actually, we were the ones who drove tech on the bench, because many people may not know that there's a rule, I think it's 1041, that says that they do not allow the electronic transmission of data to the bench area. So we did it the first time at the Hall of Fame Classic here in Kansas City, which led to being able to, both the Mountain West and the Big 12 getting waivers to be able to do it with Shot Tracker on the bench. So, the data we provide, I think, it's one of the incredible things is that it's real time. So literally we're able to capture this data, throw it to the cloud, bring it back down in less than 100 milliseconds. To give some perspective, it takes you about 300 milliseconds to blink. So that should give some context in regards to the speed and the accuracy. And, we're providing not only court view of movement of the players, but we're providing the stats in real time. We're providing advanced analytics. Traditionally, what has happened is that people have gotten access to advanced analytics, maybe 24 hours via some of the other systems, or 48 hours, or just some after time. And what we're doing is utilizing the tracking data and machine learning. We're able to identify these events, whether it's the impact of ball reversals or paint touches, or the number of ball screens, or where the ball screens, or who's actually in the ball screen. We're able to provide all this data in real time, which from our perspective is a game changing. Imagine a coach being able to look and say, okay, what are the things that are working and what are not working? Where do we have the highest points per possession, but we have the lowest possessions? We need to do more of X and less than Y, because X is working against this team. So that's how we're seeing people consume the data. As you've alluded to, that some of the data was integrated with ESPN, and we're really excited about that, because we think we just skimmed the surface. I mean, it was a quick turnaround for us. So we see the opportunity to really enhance that experience and utilize that data all in real time for the fans. And then when I think about what Jeff is doing, I get even more excited, because now you got this additional, not just tracking data and X, Y, and Z data, where historically Z hasn't really been available to folks, right? So now you get X, Y, and Z data in real time. So if you think about when you take the power of SIG and what SIG is doing, and the ability to ingest and capitalize on these advanced analytics that's now available in real time to prepare, I think it's really amazing. One of the other things that we tested but didn't necessarily push to production was, again, as I mentioned, the controlling of cameras and being able to create these virtual cameras. We think the future using tracking data is the ability to have someone at home. I'm sure a lot of people here have cut the cord, right? Maybe you're watching your cable, either YouTube or your cable provider is providing an app on Apple TV, so you're not necessarily connected into a cable box. But we see the opportunity utilizing this data to be able to control the view that you want to look at, the camera that you want to look at, and then see the additional data integrated into that experience. So those are all things that we're testing, and we're just excited about the relationship and the partnership and being able to bring this to every different constituent in the future.
Oh, that's great. Thanks for that. So, and when I hear real time, I think, what potential impact that have on sports betting. And so I feel like I need to ask a sports betting question. I think sports betting is part of like the big three of like buzzwords with like crypto and SPAC and sports betting. Like, I feel like if you have a panel, you have to say the words crypto, SPAC, and sports betting at one point.
Got it all in one sentence.
Right. Right. So bingo. But let's talk sports betting just briefly. So this is a question for everyone. Anyone can jump in here. But how do you think tracking data, or data in general, could be utilized to power sports betting in the near future? I'll throw that up to anyone here, but hearing real time and tracking data to me just seems like there's a sports betting implication for the industry here.
Yeah, I mean, I can address that first. So a lot of times when we think about like the vision of sports betting, and if we look at what's happening in Europe, gone are the days of just betting on the outcome of the game, right? Did this team win or this team win? I mean, I think gone are those days. And when we think about like, tracking data and the opportunity, we think that, tracking data is to sports betting as high frequency trading is to the stock market. I'm sure everybody, either you read Flash Boys or you're familiar, when the stock market made the change from everybody being on the floors and, bidding to digital. I mean, changed the whole game, right? People were actually trying to get access to the data to run models, to do different types of things. So we think that there's some really core implications, in a positive manner. We also think that when you look at traditional statistic box scores, that gives really the result versus, it gives you the what versus the how. So it tells you, hey, that person got 2 points versus how they got 2 points and the implications of 2 points, right? What are the drivers to lead to that 2 points? And then how can you predict that, that W? And then I also think the speed of the data is going to open up the opportunities for, as we all know, there are prop bets that you can do without like needing the speed of the data. But then the speed of the data in my mind unlocks, a ton of different opportunities. As it relates to shot tracker in a professional level, we're, all about engaging and using, data for sports betting. At the collegiate level, because we have a relationship, we're really focused on the media partnerships, just because of how like the colleges are set up and, everything that they're trying to solve as it relates to sports betting. But the fact of the matter is that tracking data with its speed, with its accuracy, with actually giving the how and the path instead of just the result, is going to create a totally different dynamic in the sports betting world.
Okay. Anyone else want to jump in on that?
Yeah, look, I was just going to say, I agree with Davion entirely in the sense that I think that what happens, with data analytics around sports betting, very much tracks what happens, when financial trading was opened up, right? What you saw on one hand was you saw that there's a democratization of data in a way, and that more sort of close-in real-time data became available to more people. But at the same time, you really saw an increase in proprietary data sets, data being sold to people as data. So, in analytics, so they could be better at trading in the financial markets. Right? Didn't work for many people, but placed a premium on those sorts of things. And I think it's really that kind of two-headed approach that's going to emerge around sports betting. Right? I think there's more democratization that is deeper, more real-time data and analytics will be available to more people for their use. And at the same time, there'll be an enhanced value around proprietary data and analytics, on a subscription or added value or whatever that model is.
And I think we're doing more of that. I think streaming plays a huge role in this too. So kind of marrying the more granular data, tracking data specifically, is something that can have a huge advantage to enhancing a broadcast. But we did with the NFL wildcard last year. We had I think it was called Between the Lines. We had a broadcast hosted by our NFL Live crew and also co-hosted in our Vegas studio by our Daily Wager team that really looked at the NFL wildcard in real time, the game, and broke it down from an analytics and live gambling perspective there. So I think that was a big step forward. We're going to do an NBA betcast on ESPN2, I believe next week, for a Sixers Nets game. Again, that's going to have an interesting way to look at a game. And I just think with streaming having more personalized broadcast, so people can still have a lean back experience if that's what they want. Eventually they're going to have more interactive options, and I think data is going to play a huge role, especially live low latency data. And then we have to make it entertaining too. It still has an entertainment part of the broadcast that we need to figure out. I don't think we've cracked the code on that by any stretch. So I think, how do we marry those things together and give people optionality is obviously a huge aspect of the streaming world. I mean, we have Masters. I grew up, you can only watch Masters like the back nine on Saturday and Sunday, and now the Masters on 8:45 in the morning on ESPN Plus East Coast with featured groups and Amen Corner, and more data ever than, with the shot track, the shot tracers and things like that. So that's just the wave of the future. And it's just going to continue to go exponentially, especially with streaming making distribution so much easier for everyone.
Yeah, and one thing I'll add to that is I think the Jeff, you hit on it a little bit, but the content is going to be pretty significant, right? People being able to use this data to enhance. I mean, I remember when fantasy football got big, broadcast partners started bringing fantasy football shows, to help you pick your lineups. So I think that there's going to be a huge influx of content that's going to the different sports betting locations and you're going to see it on the major broadcasters also, because it's becoming mainstream.
Okay, Veer has done an excellent job sourcing a handful of questions. One question is very similar to the last question I was going to ask here, so I'm going to fuse them together and we'll transition to questions from the audience here. So my question is, what are some of the most unique stats or data points that you're capturing? Jeff, would there be anything that you're pulling, what you think are like the best, most unique or different? And Davion, you could probably layer in there on what type of tracking data points that you think are yet to get discovered or should take off. And the question from the audience is, Jeff, if you could magically retrieve any sports data you wanted, what would be your wish list? So what's cool that you have now? And if you could wave, a magic wand and pull data sets out, what would that be?
Wow. Okay. So again, a lot to unpack there. From a tracking standpoint, right? We track, we get things we track ourselves off broadcast video, things we get directly from the leagues, the official data, and then things we license from but companies that specialize. So we have a great ability to know the whole market, to know who the best players are, and globally, if someone is really good at tracking like one or two things in a sport that we think is additive to us, we'll do a deal with them. So we have an amazing amount of data that comes in from different sources that then we marry together. We scrub it, we map it. It's more accurate than even official, and that's a huge kind of a secret sauce for us that then makes us work across all of our platforms. So when we get data, like I'll use the NFL Next Gen again, just the power of knowing where all 22 people, because when you watch a game, you don't have all 22 in real time. So having real time with ships and pads to know where all the players are in an NFL game is an amazingly powerful tool. But then to have, someone like Brian Burke have the vision of creating a pass coverage model where it's going to recognize, as I said, all those classifications, and then take it another step further and then decide, like, pre-snap, like, hey, the model believes they're in this defense, but then when the ball snapped, they move to this defense. Now we have a disguised coverage, right? So you hear, analysts say they disguise a coverage or schemes, but now we have in real time when a team is disguising its coverage. And then how do we connect that to Monday Night Football? How do we bring that to a broadcast where we can say, hey, this team's been disguising their coverage 27% of the time, that's tops in the league, or this coordinator is known for that. And we can even then take from a quarterback perspective, hey, when these Drew Brees versus zone versus, all these 3 or 4 different kinds, we can identify in real time for our broadcast where he's struggling. That is something that we're doing by taking the ingredients of just knowing where everyone is and having like the vision. So that's not only something we're tracking ourselves, but it's taking, some piece of information that's just, another line of code that's coming in of a fire hose and turning it into something that fans can understand in the language of football. I think that's a communication piece is something that's super important to do that.
Yeah, if I could add to it, look, I love that example because we're doing some similar stuff in college basketball and hopefully some future sports here shortly. But play identification is a pretty big deal, and being able to understand because you have the tracking data what play teams are running, at what completion rate, because the objective of the play is to get the open shot. So although they may call a play, they may be 20% into that play, and they get an open shot or they get a layup or a backdoor cut, and you never run the whole play through. So play identification is something that we've been really spending a ton of time on, understanding who's actually in the play and what are the results and then what are the options. We get really excited about that because it could in the future provide some really good input into some exciting discussions, and especially from a sports betting perspective. So we're doing a lot of stuff there. As Jeff mentioned, just having access to the XYZ and understanding exactly where people are. I mean, right now we see our accuracy in about 2 to 4 centimeters, which is, pretty granular. And we actually update that data at about 120 times per second. So just having access to that raw and core data gives us the opportunity to run a bunch of different scenarios. We're just, skimming the surface right now. But being able to break it down in regards to who's on the court, et cetera, as Jeff mentioned, is pretty powerful.
Great.
I want to go back to the magic wand questions. I'm sorry, I didn't get the answer to that. I mean, I would take tracking for college football for all 130 schools, similar to the NFL. I mean, the scope is huge, but that would be, we just do so much college football at ESPN. I think with the NFL draft and things of that nature, there's no combine this year. Imagine we had 2 to 3 seasons of college football tracking data for players, how valuable that would be, especially for things like our draft projections that we do as well. And then just simple stuff from a stat keeping. It's not next gen type stuff, but like, play-by-play for the NBA or college sports, if it could go back more than like 1997, that would be huge for us. The fact that NBA didn't track like steals and block shots and turnovers prior to the early 1970s, when we do a list of block shot lists and there's no Wilt Chamberlain or Bill Russell, like that just hurts as a historian. So I just wish we could go back and have the foresight of record keeping. Baseball's done an amazing job going back. Baseball Reference was a huge help in Retro Sheet, of course, but like we take that for granted. But for so many sports, it's just that play record is not available. It's at a box score or team level, and especially for college sports, that would just open up a whole nother world of insight for sports, building models and moving forward, for predicting what's going to happen next.
Great, thanks, Pat. So we've got a 5-minute warning, and we've got a ton of really awesome questions from the audience here. So I'm going to start directing them at specific people. And if we could try to get 60-second responses to get a couple more of these in. So Mark, I want to bring you back in here. This is from the audience. Are there innovations on the horizon that will allow viewers to hyper-personalize their viewing experience, similar to the way gamers can personalize their playing experience with watch parties, skins, etc.?
Yeah, that's a loaded question. I mean, I think somebody must know something out there. But look, I mean, personalization ultimately for sports fans is kind of the holy grail, right? I think that's been amplified by the fact that uh, fandom has many, many more dimensions, I think, than it's ever had. So, developing specific insights about preferences and affinity has become an order of magnitude more complicated, right? I grew up in a world where if you're from Boston, I could tell you, who all your teams were, I could tell you what you ate when you went to the stadium. I could infer a whole bunch of things literally just from your geography, right? That world's changed considerably. My 13-year-old son grew up in LA and New York, but is a Milwaukee Bucks fan, right? And because he's in love with a very specific player, right? And if that player were moved to some other team, Kingdom would move. So anyway, that insight is I think is an order of magnitude more difficult now. And that's actually great because that really raises the stakes, the benefits for personalization. It's not hard to imagine a world, and this has happened in music, robustly, where you manifest preferences around things, and then you just build a continuous consumption experience, across all of that, across all of that content. In the case of music, you get something that's very specific to you. I think that's the holy grail for sports media right now, where it lives and what the business model is. Those things are all open, but clearly this very high level, very informed and very precise personalization is something great. My boss always says it's torture for him to listen to our podcast, to catch the 5 minutes about the Yankees that he really, really cares about, right? And I think that's as I said, that's a great aspiration for us, and we are continuously pointing in that direction, which is as part of super serving sports fans.
All right, thanks, Mark. So this question is for everyone or anyone. Can you talk about the ownership of player data? Should it belong to the players, teams, or should it be shared? That's a jump ball. I'm pretty sure Mark and Davion probably have an answer to that. But I'll let someone volunteer to answer that question.
So I'm going to take a stab at this. Very, very controversial question. So look, I think there's a lot of times people generalize player data, right? And I think player data comes in multiple facets, right? So there was a Marquette Sports Law review that talked about when players play in the public domain, how does that impact, all of the events of the data and who owns it? And what the Sports Law review said is, hey, it's owned by the event because you're playing in the public domain, et cetera, right? Whether that's on television or, if you're at a game, it's in the public domain, so anybody can stay there. And, my good friend David Stern at one point had, sued Stats, I believe, because they were actually watching TV and getting this data, and he actually lost. And he knew he was going to lose, right? But, his point was to forge a relationship with them, which turned into a sponsorship of the NBA. Now, when you look at like the different subset of data, you've got tactical data, which is movement data, data that relates to, box score data, et cetera. Then you have biometric data, which gets, how I like to differentiate that is, above the skin, under the skin type of data. And then if you look at what's going on in the college space, you could consider name, image, and likeness data as data that belongs to, as just the image and likeness of the player. I think it's really important to segment out the different types of data versus talking it. So I think, just based on what we're seeing from event data, I do believe that, players should own their likeness. I think that there's a differentiation there in regards to how it's used in broadcast versus the actual monetization of their likeness. I think there's a piece there. And I think that there's also, if you look at the CBA and different types of agreements as it relates to players' data for biometric, because, you know, that's somewhat personal, right? When you look at whether it's temperature, pulse ox, you know, heart rate, etc. So it's a controversial topic. I don't think we have the full answer. I think it's still being solved. But I do think that there's a subset of that data that should be owned by the player, because you can't necessarily look at a player in the public domain and says, his temperature is about 87. No, you can't do that. So I think we have to define the different types of data, and there's going to be rules that are broken down for these different types of data because of the current rules in play. And I think that this is a very evolving market, especially in the collegiate space, very, very evolving at this point.
That's great, Davion. Great answer at the end there. We were right on time, so certainly appreciate everyone's participation here, and just want to thank the audience. Those questions were great, and I wanted to make sure that I wasn't serving all softballs here. So I'm glad we ended on a tough one, and Davion, nice job on the answer. Certainly looking forward to working with everyone on the panel here. Certainly, if there's any questions, comments, concerns, feel free to reach out to me directly on LinkedIn. If you've got other questions for myself or Mark, I can probably take care of that offline. So feel free to reach out. And thanks again for the time.